I'm all right. How are you?
Very good, very good. I mean, we're still. I had my computer rebooted right at the last minute. Go ahead, say something. Let's see.
Greetings from Iowa.
Yeah, great, great. Okay, so let me show you around here. Here's our. Whoops. Here's our library. Here's our classroom and students. And you'll see over in the corner there we have the collected works of scientific papers. and we're so excited to connect with you today, Craig. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm going to record this call. Hold on just a second. There you go. Okay. And what we've been studying is we've been studying this idea that the world is full of intelligence, sentience, and consciousness. If you have that intellectual understanding and that experiential, the level of experience of that, then what does that mean for science, and what does it mean? How would we do science differently? How might we do economics differently? How might we do all kinds of different things? And so it's this idea of perennial wisdom that you so eloquently speak of in your book, The Supreme Awakening. And whoops, are you okay? We getting a good?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what we thought we'd like, we just had somebody call in earlier today from England who's Cambridge PhD science guy, and he's been thinking along these lines of how do we reinvent science, how do we rethink science, how do we rethink how we do science, and he runs a master's program in what he calls holistic science, and so we've had different people call in, and what we were thinking you might do today is to talk with us a little bit about that perennial philosophy and the unique approach Maharishi has to higher states of consciousness, to describing and delineating higher states of consciousness, and those beautiful descriptions you have in your book, or whatever else you have prepared for us today, Craig. Whoops.
No, it ended.
Contacts. Let's see. Craig.
Craig's just the fourth one down on the left.
There it is.
Oh, it did drop. Sorry.
Okay, let's try
That was
it.
weird because it wasn't even sticking.
Yeah, it was perfect. Hey, Craig. Somehow we lost you. Can you see us all right?
I can.
Can you hear us all right?
I can hear you perfectly.
Oh,
How about,
great.
On this sound.
Oh, it's the best Skype call we've ever had, I think. Yeah.
So you were just telling me about the person from England.
Yeah, Stephen Harding. So we've had Keith Wallace is going to call in and talk tomorrow about reinventing health and medicine in terms of holism, and not rejecting reductionism, but kind of transcending and including it, and looking at this more this approach that has being at the center rather than the material universe at the center. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So who's there? It's a little fuzzy. I can see some people sitting on a couch, and I can see who I think is you.
Yeah. Go ahead. Everybody introduce themselves to Craig.
Hi, Craig. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm Rob Fox. I went to NUM about 5 years or so ago.
I certainly do remember you, Rob.
Oh, nice. I remember.
Good to
you
see you.
So I've been living in Hawaii since then, and
Wow.
never finished my degree program, but having the course offered here inspired me to come and finish. So here I am.
Wow. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
And I'm Alexis. I'm studying here. This is my second semester with MUM. I'm a transfer student, but I was really excited to be able to have the opportunity to come to Hawaii.
Fabulous.
And Craig, it's Devin. and I was highly influenced by this Dream Awakening, reading it about a year ago. So really enthused for today's presentation and to see you face to face.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. You know, if what I would much rather do, and it's not so easy to do it at distance, is just, you know, teleport myself to that room and, you know, sit in a circle and chat with you guys. I never aspired to be a talking head, and that's not my first book. So I'll give a little presentation, since that's kind of what you do at a distance, and I don't pretend that any of this is going to be new to you, okay? So it's just some thoughts, and probably something that you're familiar with already, but let me see about sharing the screen here.
Okay, and then Craig, you know, what we might do while you're talking is we might shut our microphone off, because it seems to have a more consistent signal, although it's pretty good right now. And then when we
Okay.
and then when we get into the interactive part, we'll turn the microphone back on, just so you know. Okay.
Okay.
Whoop. Whoop. There it is. Yeah, we got it, Craig.
All right, good. So here we go. So I'm no longer on your screen, right?
You are.
just
We have a little.
slide here.
Whoops. No. We have a little picture of you down at the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. So in the Vedic literature, it's called Atma. In Taoism, it's called the Tao. In Buddhism, it's called Adhibuddha. In ancient Greece, it was called Pearson, which translates as the boundless or the unlimited. In Judaism, it's called Ein Sof. Plato called it the good and the one and the beautiful. Aristotle called it being. Plotinus, who was an Egyptian Roman philosopher about 200 or 300 AD, called it the one and the infinite. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was one of many Christian saints who called it the Word. Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel called it the Absolute, German philosopher. Our own Ralph Waldo Emerson called it the Oversoul. Carl Jung called it unus mundus, a Latin term meaning one world. Tribes in southern Africa call it Hunhu and Ubuntu. The Aborigines of Australia call it the dream time. And in the native Hawaiian tradition, it's called Lokahi. And correct me if I'm wrong about that. And modern theoretical physicists refer to it as the unified field or the string field. And what they're all describing is a field of unity that underlies the diversity of the environment, the world, the cosmos that we find around us. So every tradition, or almost every tradition that we're aware of, has this notion of a field of unity underlying diversity. And furthermore, virtually every tradition has the notion that this underlying field of unity can be experienced directly. Human beings can experience it directly. It's not just a philosophical idea, but it's a matter of direct experience. And beyond that, furthermore, many, if not most traditions say that the easiest way to experience this underlying unity is within us, that it's most accessible by experience within us. And therefore we find throughout the ages what I call the summons to look within. So here, for example, from Taoism, Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching, one who knows others is intelligent, one who knows himself is enlightened. So others being outside oneself within. In Buddhism, we have this statement from the Buddha, be a lamp unto your own feet. Do not seek outside yourself. In ancient Greece, at the very headwaters of the Western philosophical tradition, we have this simple inscription at Delphi in Greece, know thyself. Christianity, this beautiful statement from Jesus, behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, wrote, look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig. Here's Plotinus again, Neoplatonism. This region of truth is not to be investigated as a thing external to us. It is within us. A group of thinkers in Egypt in the 2nd and 3rd centuries set down a body of writings called the Hermetic writings, and this statement expresses one of the themes of those writings. Call yourself back then to yourself, O soul, and seek in yourself all that you ought to get knowledge of. Again, in Christianity, here's St. Augustine, probably the third most influential person in the Christian tradition after Jesus and Paul. Go not outside, but return within thyself. In the inward man dwelleth the truth. In Judaism, from the Talmud, the greatest wisdom is to know thyself. In Shintoism, from Japan, the human mind, partaking of divinity, is an abode of the deity, which is the spiritual essence. There exists no highest deity outside the human mind. And here what we're talking about then is what we call the perennial philosophy, sometimes called the primordial tradition. And the basic tenets, I'm sure you've covered all of this, but just to say them here, the basic tenets are these, that as we've seen, there's an underlying field of unity, that at the basis of the extraordinary diversity of the universe is a field of unity, sometimes termed the ground of being or the divine ground, given all sorts of different names as we've seen, in which everything has its being and apart from which nothing could exist. And the second theme, as we've seen, is the idea that it's able to be experienced directly, that human beings are capable of experiencing this underlying transcendental reality directly deep within themselves. And finally, that the very purpose of life is to experience this field directly and be transformed by it. Just read this point here, that the purpose of life is to discover and experience this divine ground, to reconnect with the underlying essence of life, and to do so is to realize one's true nature, the eternal self, and to transform and fulfill one's life. So the whole purpose of life is to be transformed and fulfilled through this experience of reconnecting with the underlying field of unity, which is found most easily within us. So I want to shift gears for a minute and see how have people experienced this in different times and places. And to do that, let's do a little time travel. Let's imagine that we're floating up from beautiful Hawaii and from beautiful Iowa, and we're going to travel together down onto the British Isles, as you see there, and we're going to touch down at this point, marking the boundary right between Wales, which is that peninsula in the southwest corner, the boundary between Wales and England. And here we are on the ground, and not only have we relocated to this boundary between Wales and England, but let's imagine that we've traveled back in time, 219 years. So the year is 1798. Let's imagine that it's early in the morning, at the end of July, and we are flies on the wall there. We're just invisible witnesses to a young man waking up early in the morning at the end of July 1798, and he's about to set off through this gorgeous countryside to do one of the things which he loves to do most in the world, which is go out walking. And our young man will often go for days at a time, 2, 3, 4, 5 days at a stretch, tramping through the countryside, often with his sister, before returning home. This is the kind of scenery that he would see. Obviously these are photos from the current time, but in 1798, it couldn't have looked that much different. This is the Wye River, and this is in the Wye River Valley, the beautiful area in between Wales and England. And we can imagine this man and his sister walking along the banks of the Wye River and coming up over a hill on the bank and looking down the other side where the river winds around. And what they see is this beautiful abbey. And even in 1798, the abbey looked exactly like this. It was a ruin even then, 219 years ago. A beautiful stone lattice work, open to the sky and open to the air and the wind. And as our young man looked down at this beautiful abbey, he felt an experience coming over him. It's an experience that he had had many times before, an experience that he lived for, actually. And he didn't know where the experience came from. He didn't know where it went when it went. He just knew that he cherished it. So here he is looking down at this abbey. Once again, this fleeting experience, this unpredictable experience comes over him. It lasts for a few minutes, and then it goes. And he opens his eyes, and he stands up, and he walks down and catches up with his sister, and they keep on walking for a couple more days. And it's only when he gets home, a few days later, that he's able to pick up a pen and some paper and write down some words about what he experienced during this several-day walkabout. And he writes nonstop, never lifting his pen from the paper. And finally, when he's done, he looks and sees what he's written, and it turns out to be a poem, 168 lines long. And he will later say, "No poem of mine was ever written under circumstances more pleasant for me to remember than this." And in fact, this guy is a poet. The fact that he's a poet, though, is known only to a few close friends of his. However, his very first book of poetry was already at the publisher when he set out on this walking tour. So you can imagine how he feels with his brand new creation, his 168-line poem. He wants to include it in the book. He picks it up, he rushes down to the printer, he asks, is there any way that this new poem can be included in the slender volume of verse? And the printer says, you've arrived just in time. Yeah, it can be, we'll include it. And it does get included, and the book is published. And within a few months of its publication, the man goes from being an unknown poet to being a celebrity, a rock star, to the extent that there were rock stars in the late 1700s in England. Celebrity on the British literary scene. Not only that, but his book transforms the whole direction of British literature to that point. Up until then, the literary period is known today as the classical period. The poetic structures were very formal. The language was very formal. It was written by highly educated people, aimed at highly educated people, quite intellectual. This new volume, which was a sensation, marked the beginning of what later was called the Romantic period. The language was simpler, it was still beautiful, but it was simpler, more accessible to everyday people. It was more resonant with the heart, with feelings and emotion, still thoughtful, but not so strictly intellectual. And this changed everything for England, and actually for the whole literary direction of all of Europe. So I hope that's enough of a build-up. Let me read to you a few lines from this poem that was part of what changed everything in England. The poet describes that blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we're laid asleep in body and become a living soul. All with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Now, of course, you know what he's talking about. We know what he's talking about. Let's circle back and just highlight a few key lines here. He begins in this excerpt by talking about that blessed mood. So the word blessed or blessed, we know what that means. It conveys some sense of holiness, some feeling of sanctity. The word blessed is related to the word bliss. So there's a subtle connotation of bliss, of happiness. In the next few lines, he talks about how the whole weight of the world is lifted off of him. Not just the world, but he calls it the unintelligible world. And then he comes back to the word blessed, and it's in this phrase, the serene and blessed mood. So serene, quietude, quiescence, peace. Then he says the affections gently lead us on. So he's not straining, he's not forcing something to happen, he's not contriving this experience. He just feels as though he's being gently led on. And then he shifts to becoming a kind of physiologist. He observes the changes in his physical condition, and he describes them quite precisely. He says, the breath of this corporeal frame. What's a corporeal frame? The corporeal frame is 1700s speak for the body. So the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended. So that's a very precise description of a physiological change. The breath almost suspended. You can picture breath rate slowing down, even being suspended for periods. You can imagine when he says the motion of our human blood almost suspended. You can imagine the heart rate slowing. These are physiological changes, and then he caps it off by saying, we're laid asleep in body. So he's experiencing a state of very deep physiological rest, but is he actually sleeping? No, because immediately after that he says, we become a living soul. Now let's unpack this for a moment. We become a living soul. If he says we become a living soul, underline the word living, what does that say about what he was prior to this experience? It means he was dead in some way. If he's now living, prior to this he was dead, or at least not fully alive. Then he says, with an eye made quiet, so here again something's becoming quiet. He says it's the eye, could be his physical eye becoming relaxed, but I think more likely he's talking about something larger, like the eye of the mind, the eye of consciousness, the eye of awareness becoming quiet. And he tells us what's causing it to become quiet. What's causing this sense of serenity? It's the power of harmony and the deep power of joy. Now he doesn't tell us where the power of harmony and the deep power of joy reside, but if we were to imagine where they do reside, where would that be? It would have to be within us. It's not down there in the ruined abbey or in the Wye River. That power of harmony and deep power of joy that's causing him to feel gently led onward or inward has to be within, has to be drawing him within. And then finally the capstone line here, we see into the life of things. And just to unpack that for a moment, a simple little sentence, 7 words. If instead of that line he had said, I see more deeply into my own life, we wouldn't have been surprised by that. That would have made sense as the culminating line for everything that came before, because after all, he's talking about settling inward and having a unique kind of experience. So he might have said at the end, I see more deeply into my own life, but he didn't. He says, we see, so we, he never says I, it's always we, as though he's a spokesperson for all human beings. Everybody potentially can have this experience. We see into the life of things. So that connotes some sense of coming into contact with some underlying essence of life, not just his own life, but the life of things, the life of everything, the life of nature, the life of the cosmos. We see into the life of things. Beautiful line. So here, we could ask, does this line express those principles of the perennial philosophy? Yes, it does. There's an indication of an underlying unity there at the end when he says we see into the life of things. Where is that unity experienced? It's experienced within himself. He feels gently led inward by an inward power of harmony and joy. And is there a sense of transformation that comes through this? He doesn't say that specifically, but it's pretty simple to see that that's what he's describing when he says that the whole weight of the world is lifted from him, and this is the experience that he has. Obviously, it's immensely fulfilling for him. So there we have the three characteristics of the perennial philosophy presented in terms of an actual person's experience in this beautiful language. All right, so who is our mystery poet here? You tell me. Should be obvious. Are we still connected?
We are connected, Craig. You haven't been talking into nothing. We're here. We've been sitting on the edge of our seats, and now everybody's trying to figure out who the poet is.
I hope you'll be knocked a little bit.
Well, so think of it, Wadsworth.
Wordsworth.
Yeah.
And with a name like Wordsworth, what are you going to grow up to be? A poet. Within a few years of the publication of his book, he became Poet Laureate of England, and he held that position for more than 50 years, I believe, a longer period than anybody has held it before or since. Here's the book that changed everything. Book cover designs have come a long way since Wordsworth. His name isn't even there. Also on the cover, if there were an author, would be his name. So we're going to do a little bit more time travel, and we want to do this because, if in the audience there were somebody who were very skeptical, they might say, well, fine, Wordsworth, it's a beautiful experience from Wordsworth, but after all, he was a romantic poet, and what's the job description of a romantic poet other than to have beautiful experiences, fancy, sublime experiences? That's what they do, right? And they describe them in their romantic verse. But some skeptics might claim that it would be a stretch to say that that's a universal experience. In fact, there is a small branch of philosophy that challenges the whole notion of the perennial philosophy, that challenges the notion that these experiences, that there is a such thing as a universal experience. This small band of philosophers, which began to express their voices in the 1970s, said, no, there's no such thing as a universal experience. They said they were what's known as constructivists, and they said that all human experience is shaped by the culture into which we're born, by the language which we're taught to speak, by the expectations of our culture, and that's what shapes our experience. And that any experiences, they argue, that appear to be the same, they're really not. It's only just kind of an illusion, that all experiences are conditioned locally. So we want to challenge that contention. Let me just back up a bit. Prior to this group of philosophers coming forward from the 1970s onward, there was the notion, of course, as we were indicating, of a perennial philosophy. For decades, there had been a notion of a universal experience, and that notion has continued through the 20th century to this day. I'm just saying that for the sake of a philosophical argument, there are those who challenge that notion. So we want to challenge them back here, and that's what we're going to do by looking at some experiences that are from radically different cultures and radically different time periods, and seeing if there's something underlying the mere words that seem the same on the surface. So we're going back to about 700 BC now, and when we touched down, that arrow was pointing to what was then the capital city of China. We're going to be, again, the invisible witnesses to this legendary figure, Lao Tzu, about whom very little is known. Very little tends to be known about any figures from antiquity like this, but Lao Tzu is the legendary founder of Taoism, and the story of Lao Tzu is that he was supposedly the keeper of scrolls in the palace in the capital city of China. He was known for his wisdom, that at a certain point in his life he determined that he wanted to leave the pressures, the busyness of the capital city and the responsibilities of capital life and withdraw into solitude in the wilderness and spend the rest of his life in meditation in the wilderness. So he, according to legend anyway, he walks away from the capital city and finally reaches the border, where he's stopped by the border guard and recognizes who he is. And the border guard says, Lao Tzu, if you have to leave us, then please at least stay here a few days and write down your wisdom. And that's the legendary story of how the Tao Te Ching was born, the great text of Taoism, actually a text for all humanity these days. So here let me read a few lines from the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu says, become totally empty. Quiet the restlessness of the mind. Be still. Stillness reveals the secrets of eternity. Eternity embraces the all-possible. The all-possible leads to a vision of oneness. A vision of oneness brings about universal love. Universal love supports the great truth of nature, and the great truth of nature is Tao. Whoever knows this truth lives forever. The body may perish, deeds may be forgotten, but he who has Tao has all eternity. So a few key lines here. They're all quite key lines, but here some highlights are, he describes an actual experience, making clear to us that this is not just some philosophical speculation or ideal. He's describing a condition of the mind in which the restlessness of the mind settles down, becomes still, the mind becomes empty, and when the waves or restlessness of the mind becomes still, what happens? What gets revealed to the person in that experience? He tells us, he says, the secrets of eternity. And he goes on to sketch out some of the key characteristics of eternity. He describes it as the all-possible. So this underlying field is a field of all possibilities. He describes this experience as a vision of oneness. So this underlying field is unified. It's a unity. He talks about how this brings about universal love. So this underlying unity is a field of love. He describes it as the great truth of nature, and he calls it the Tao. And then he goes, Wordsworth even one better, he says that whoever knows this truth lives forever. Your body can pass away, but if you've had this experience of this great truth...
The battery is currently low.
So do we see the perennial tradition here? Is he talking about an underlying unity? Absolutely. It's very explicit. Can that unity be experienced? That's the second tenet of the perennial tradition. Yes, he tells us. He's describing the nature of that experience here. And the third tenet of the perennial philosophy, is that experience transformative? If you've had that experience, if you've been grounded in that experience, you live forever. That's a pretty big transformation. You have all eternity. So I'd like to, let me just stop now and see if there are any comments or questions, and then I have a few more examples to give you, and then we'll shift gears. So any observations or questions? I'm going to stop for a moment here.
Okay, can you hear us, Craig?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
I guess I'm kind of eager to see the rest of your
Yeah.
presentation. I mean, I definitely agree that there is this kind of universal experience that is potentially accessed by everyone.
Keep talking, because he's there.
But I kind of, like the question that comes into my mind is kind of, so what? like what do we do with this? What do we do with this experience? How do we take this and incorporate it into, our lives and our purpose and into the world? But I'm sure you've got more to present.
Can you hear us, Craig? Craig, can you hear us? Is he frozen?
No, he's not, and the microphone's on.
Let me see. It might not be, but do we do this? Oh, it's on. Craig, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Craig?
The only other thing would be the system preferences.
Okay, we could, what happened? Why is that? You can do something here. Skype. Hearing a loud screeching noise. Oh, maybe because I've used this.
I can hear it too.
Yeah, okay, hearing a loud screeching noise. All right, let's go to system preferences like you
Or
suggested.
maybe just hang up.
Yeah.
We're gonna call you back, Craig.
Yeah, I think you
That
should
seemed
move
to have stopped.
Yeah, he's
But-
feeding back, but wonder
Yeah,
why.
we'll see if that fixes it. If not, we can try something else. How about now, Craig? Can you hear us?
We're back?
Yeah. Were you hearing a funny noise?
Yeah, we could hear it as well, although it was faint on this end.
Yeah. It was ear splitting on this end.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, we're good, we're back good. So, did you hear the question?
Yeah, the question was the last I heard was so what?
Right. I mean, essentially, that's it. No, just like, how, how this universal experience is then, incorporated and integrated into our lives, and what do we do with that? I think that everyone here definitely agrees that it exists.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. One answer would be for some people, the description, like the one that we just read from Lao Tzu, would almost make the answer to that question self-evident. If you want all eternity, that kind of transformation of life that would come to opening one's mind to, the eternal, the immortal, that seems pretty attractive in itself. But it sounds like your question is more, how does that translate into some actual practical value? Is that right? That's what you're asking?
Yes, and so how does, yes, in short, yes.
Yeah, okay. Let me share my screen again, because I think that'll be answered as we go forward, and not in any way that's going to surprise you.
Has that sound come back for you? Because I can hear it a little bit again now.
It sounds to me like running water in the background now. Before it was more of an electronic squeal.
Yeah.
Let me,
It's odd. I wonder why.
let me see if I shut the microphone off if it goes away. Does that go away? Did it go away when I shut the mic off?
Yeah, but so did every sound at that end, it sounded like.
Right,
Yeah.
it was-
It's just kind of the way it's probably going to be. Let me move this back up here.
Okay.
So maybe there's not value there.
This can be laid down.
Yeah, maybe there's not value there. Go ahead, Craig. See, it's gone away now.
Yeah.
I think it's related to the relationship of this to that
It's
microphone.
probably like an earth loop or something.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
it's not grounded. there's no third pin on the plug, so if you get some,
Yeah. Or it's just a relationship with that microphone and that speaker. You know, something feeding back. Okay, Craig, can you see us again?
I think it only happens when it's plugged in.
We're all,
Yeah, I can.
okay, good. Okay.
So let's hold that thought. Would you be interested in a few more examples just for fun, or do you want to skip over and move more quickly?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear some more examples. Hey, Craig, I have maybe this, I don't want to, spoil your train of thought here, but I had a thought on Rob's question. And that is, absent this experience, we destroy the earth and each other. So that's the practical application of it, because, we can look around us and see what a surface kind of intellectual understanding of nature brings to us. It brings us things like Skype, but it's a partial development, and without that experiential understanding backed by the intellectual understanding of unity, then we don't see purpose in the world, and we don't care for it. So I'll just throw that out as an idea. I think it's essential to sustainability. So go ahead, Craig.
Well, you can take it one step further. Ralph Waldo Emerson has a wonderful line that he wrote in 1848, and the line goes, the reason the world lacks unity, the reason the world lies broken and in heaps, is because man is disunited.
The battery is currently low.
So,
could you repeat the last line? Because man is
disunited from himself.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's not exact word for word. I can get the exact word for word, but that's very close to what Wordsworth wrote. And I imagine what the world was like in 1848, before there was electricity, before there was the kind of communication that we have. And if he looks out at the world and finds that it lies broken and in heaps, what would he think looking out today? It's just so much more broken and in heaps. But his point was that that the reason that there are problems at all in the world is that man, or that human beings, are disconnected from themselves, disconnected from what he called the oversoul. So that, in Emerson's view, was the source of every problem. That's why the world was broken and in heaps. And just extending what you said, Lonnie, that's why people get sick. That's why there's crime. That's why there's drug abuse. That's why there are horrific things like human trafficking and slavery down to this day. That's why there's an opioid epidemic. That's why there's destruction of the environment, just because of that. Now, that's a pretty abstract idea, and it's a pretty grand claim, but that was Emerson's claim. And I think that claim is there, if not explicitly, then implicitly in the writings of most of these people, that life is really fulfilled, brought to its fruition through having this experience, and not just having it, but becoming grounded in that unity that underlies diversity. There's a person in the Christian tradition named Saint Gregory of Nyssa, who lived in the 500s AD, and he has this beautiful set of paragraphs where it's so clear that he says, unless you've had the experience, unless you've actually had the experience, there's no possible way to communicate to anybody what the experience is, and therefore there's no possible way to communicate to them what they're missing. There's no way to communicate to people the catastrophe that their life is in the absence of this experience, because it can only be understood in and through the experience itself. So, to answer your question, Rob, we'll come to it. We can speak philosophically as we've been doing. We can show the practical benefits of having this experience on a regular basis, which means, looking at the research on the TM technique, which, shows the benefits in multiple areas of life. But none of that really reaches the kinds of things that some of the people like Gregory of Nyssa and others and like Lao Tzu are striving to communicate to us through their verbal descriptions.
And it's also sort of not, it's not so much an instrumental thing. In other words, we can make of it an instrumental thing. We can make, okay, we do this because we get rid of our headaches and everything. But the experience itself and the intellectual understanding of it is its own complete whole, I guess I would say. It doesn't have to be seen in the context of some of something else that improves your life. I'm not if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's for many of these figures who've described this experience through history, the claim, and this is another point of the perennial philosophy. A skeptic might say, okay, I can accept that what these people are describing is a settling of the mind. I can, I'll go that far with you. And they might say, I can accept that it's possible for, the human mind to reach a state of stillness, of inner quiescence. I'm with you on that. But it's a big leap to say that inner field of mental stillness, of mental silence, is the underlying unity of nature. That's a pretty tall claim. And we can defend that claim through some logical arguments, but ultimately what a number of these figures say anyway is that when you have that experience, that reality is self-evident. The fact that what you're experiencing is the ultimate reality of life, that is self-evident. There's no, the experience is so clear, and it comes with such force that it's just self-evident that this is not just the reality of my own subtle awareness. This is the life of things, as Wordsworth put it. This is the vision of oneness, as Lao Tzu put it. So it's as though the proof of it is in the experience itself. But it can be transactional. We can find and we can empirically validate practical benefits that result from having this experience on a regular basis.
Great.
Any more from you, Lonnie, or anybody?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, I guess my initial question, I don't want to interrupt your presentation either. But,
No,
like a kind of ongoing discussion we've had and touched into here a few times is this idea of states and stages. So there are, these states of consciousness, such as experiencing TM, experiencing this oneness, and then there are kind of stages of, you could call it consciousness development or psychological development, that are not fleeting experiences, but are like integrated into one's, waking everyday reality. And
right.
I'd just like to hear, your thoughts and insights on the relationship between states and stages.
Yeah, just to answer briefly, and again, I'm sure that you've talked about this thoroughly. In my own research, many of the figures that I've found who describe the experience of transcending, take Wordsworth, for example, the experience seemed to be fleeting. In fact, it was pretty clear that it was just a temporary experience for him. And it's, there's no record that he had any kind of meditative technique. It just came upon him spontaneously. When one reads Lao Tzu, on the other hand, or some other figures, I'm thinking of Shankara and a few others like Meister Eckhart, you get the feeling that the experience of transcendence is no longer just a temporary thing for these people, but it has become integrated as an all-time reality, that the experience of transcendence is there as a backdrop or background or underlayment to the states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And that of course would be what Maharshi terms cosmic consciousness, the fifth state. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's definitely a distinction between having an experience which comes and goes, like this experience of transcending, which is a fourth state of consciousness, but it's not a lasting state. Just like waking, dreaming, and sleeping are not lasting states. The first time you arrive at a lasting state is when you come to cosmic consciousness. That's lasting. And then in Maharshi's model, at least, the states of consciousness above that are, when you reach them, they become permanent. They don't come and go. They become stabilized in your experience.
I think one of the things is the terminology, and that when Mars talks about higher states of consciousness, those are permanent stages.
Yeah, I understand that.
But, and then the states are the in Mars's terms, those might be more called a stage.
Sure. But just we've been exploring the kind of the relationship between this states and more permanent stages, and just trying to explore and understand ourselves. How the experience of these states contributes to more permanent stages of consciousness, and also if other practices or insights or study is necessary on top of just having these experiential states.
It's a good question. So let's hold that thought. Let me give you just a couple more quick examples, just to make the point for our hypothetical band of philosophers who are critiquing our contention here, or challenging our contention that there's such thing as a universal experience. Here's Plato. Let me just read this from one of his dialogues, the Phaedo. But when returning into herself, the soul passes into the other world, the region of purity and eternity, and immortality and unchangeableness, which are her kindred. And with them she ever lives, when she is by herself and is not let or hindered. And then she ceases from her erring ways, and being in communion with the unchanging is unchanging. And this state of the soul is called wisdom. The soul is in the very likeness of the divine, and immortal, and intellectual, and uniform, and insoluble, and unchangeable. Oops. So, highlighting a few things here, coming back to our key facets of the perennial philosophy. Is he describing, number one, a field of underlying unity? He is. He's talking about here the region of purity and eternity. He describes it as unchanging, and at the very bottom he uses the word uniform for it, indissoluble, unchangeable, so underlying, unchanging field of unity. The second question is, can we experience it directly? Plato says, yes, we can. And how do we do it? Through the soul, or modern term would be the mind or consciousness, returning into herself, diving within. And is there a transformational aspect to this? Yes, he says, that when one comes into contact with that, the soul, being in communion with the unchanging, is unchanging. So the soul itself becomes unchanging by virtue of having the experience of this unchanging field. And he says the soul is in the very likeness of. In other words, it becomes transformed into, the soul becomes transformed into the divine and the immortal and intellectual. Jumping way ahead, Christian tradition, here's Teresa of Avila, saint of the Catholic Church, doctor of the Catholic Church actually. She says, my soul at once becomes recollected, and I enter the state of quiet, or that of rapture, so that I can use none of my faculties and senses. Everything is stilled, and the soul is left in a state of great quiet and deep satisfaction. There sometimes springs an interior peace and quietude which is full of happiness, for the soul is in such a state that it thinks there is nothing that it lacks. Even speaking, by which I mean vocal prayer and meditation, wearies it. It, meaning my soul, would like to do nothing but love. This condition lasts for some time and may even last for long periods. So if we were to set this passage side by side with, say, what we just read from Lao Tzu, we'd see the parallels in terms of the mind becoming quiet, which he says, my soul becomes recollected. That means coming back into itself. That's what was meant then. Another way of saying dining within. And again, the idea of a stillness of mind and just a transformation into the experience of peace and quietness. And there are some lines highlighted. And just as Lao Tzu referred to it as a field of universal love, so does Teresa of Avila on the other side of the world, 2 millennia later. And last example that I'll give you is Howard Thurman, who was the mentor of Martin Luther King Jr. Howard Thurman was a Baptist preacher. He was a PhD theologian, active in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, a leader in the civil rights movement very early on. Here he writes, there's no clear distinction between mind and spirit, but there is a quality of mind that is more than thought and the process of thought. This quality involves feelings and the wholeness in which the life of man has its being. What's being considered is what a man means totally when he says, I am. This self shares profoundly in the rhythm that holds and releases, but never let go. There is the rest of detachment and withdrawal when the spirit moves into the depths of the region of the great silence, where world weariness is washed away. Put this side by side with the passage from Wordsworth, and where Wordsworth talked about how the heavy and weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lifted. Here's Howard Thurman talking about world weariness is washed away, and there's the region of the great silence. So it's hard to say. I think the claim that these people are talking about very different kinds of experiences. First of all, that claim is kind of hard to defend the more you stack these up like this. And if we had lots more time, there are dozens more that we could read. Where, they're all quite parallel in describing a quieting of the mind, a feeling of wholeness, of fulfillment, of deep rest and of inner transformation, and a sense of coming into some contact with or communion with some underlying reality. Those are the themes that come through all of these, and it's based on experiences like this that the whole notion of perennial philosophy even came into being. Perennial meaning found everywhere at every period in history. So let's ask what's new today, and maybe this, we'll come around to Rob's question a little bit. We're not the first to identify these experiences. There have been people who've been interested in these kinds of experiences of transcendence from around the world for well over a century, more like a century and a half or 2 centuries. That people have really studied these kinds of experiences. So the idea of perennial wisdom is not new. But what is new is that we have a technique for experiencing the transcendent, and that's our TM technique. And, certainly there have been techniques throughout the ages that have aimed at having this kind of experience. I've been recently, these past months, reading some of the writers in the Orthodox Christian tradition, the Eastern branch of the Christian Church, and like the Desert Fathers and some of the early fathers of the Christian Church in the early centuries. And from that earliest period on down, there are techniques of prayer which aim at having this kind of transcending experience. So this isn't a new idea that there's a technique for this. What may be new is that the technique is simple and effortless. Those early church fathers did talk about techniques of battling your thoughts, of trying to shoot down your thoughts. That's as soon as they arise, in order to try to blank the mind. They knew that if the mind could become still, and if the mind could move beyond thought, then there was an extraordinary experience to be had. But the experience, the technique for many of them was trying to shoot down the thoughts as they arose. And we have also an understanding of what happens in the mind when we transcend. And I'll come to that in a moment. We have also scientific research on the effects of regular transcending, and that specifically on the effects of regular transcending, what changes in the mind and the body and the behavior and the environment. And that would be our research on the TM technique, which has accumulated over all these decades. Also new today is a new model of human development, Marsh's model of higher states of consciousness. Of course, there are multiple models of human development. This one, to my knowledge, is the one that is most comprehensive, most inclusive of the highest stage of human development, highest phase. And then also new today is the experience, the track record of what happens when a technique for regular transcending is introduced into areas that are challenged in the modern world, that lie broken and in heaps, to use Emerson's phrase, in areas like education and cardiovascular health and PTSD and substance abuse and prison rehabilitation. There we see advantages of the most practical kind. We see changes in areas where almost nothing has worked before. It would be almost fair to say. So let me stop here and invite any questions or comments or discussion.
I had a quick comment. A thought came to me when you were talking about this, higher states of consciousness and this kind of distinction that Rob was making between those fleeting experiences of something greater than yourself and the permanent establishment of the experience and understanding of that. And one of the things is that Maharishi and other traditions, they caution against the cultivation of those temporary states as an end goal. In other words, they appreciate those, but we're taught when we meditate, we don't try to hold on to that experience or we don't look for that experience. If it happens, it happens. But the idea is the regular innocent experience of that cultivates the broader, more fully developed reality of it, which is the goal. Am I making sense with that comment?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Craig.
Other comments on that? On Lonnie's comment?
Well, I guess my understanding is in most traditional streams focus on waking up. In other words, these states that essentially provide a glimpse into this transcendent consciousness. Whereas what Rob's referring to and more stage-based models are focused on the growing up, whereby that becomes our regular experience, that becomes the place from which we operate, the calm beneath the waves of the ocean. And I think that's a critical distinction that I haven't necessarily come across so far in Maharshi's teachings. Again, I'm very much a newcomer in that.
Okay, well let's go to that then.
Excellent.
One of the things that in the previous slide that I said is new today is an understanding of what happens in the mind when we transcend. And so here's a diagram which on the face of it is very simple. It's our bubble diagram, which we encountered right when we learned to meditate. And we've all seen this before, and it invites us to picture the mind as an ocean or a pool. And it suggests that at the surface of the ocean, like just as the surface of the ocean or a pool is wavy, similarly the mind is wavy or active or dynamic at the surface. The diagram furthermore suggests that typically we are only awake at the surface of the mind, using only that, some percentage of the mind, just the surface would be just if we're awake only at the surface, we're only using a small percentage of the mind's potential, and that there are regions of the mind below the surface, just like there are regions of an ocean below the wavy surface, which are quieter. And ultimately, just as with an ocean there's a silent depth, so too, in this model, there's a silent depth to the mind. This model is also suggesting that an answer to the question, where do thoughts come from? They come from some region deep within us that we can call the source of thought. We can call it pure consciousness. We can link it hypothetically with what modern science calls the unified field. So here is this simple diagram. But behind this diagram is a whole new paradigm of understanding what human consciousness is. If you were to go to the University of Hawaii and sit in on a class in psychology or neuroscience where the professor is discussing human consciousness, you would hear the professor express the prevailing paradigm, which is that human consciousness is just the byproduct of the electrical and chemical functioning of the brain. In this prevailing paradigm, what's fundamental to life is matter. Matter is the basic stuff of life, and the brain is matter, and consciousness is just a byproduct of the functioning of that matter, just like what you're seeing on the screen in front of you is the byproduct of the electrical functioning of your computer and my computer and the network that's connecting us, but there are no leaves there actually in the background, you see. There's no hills or pond in the background. It's just kind of an illusion. And that's the notion of that's the modern understanding of what consciousness is, that it's an illusion, really. There's no fundamental reality to it. So that's behind this apparently simple diagram is a new paradigm that invites us to consider that there is a fundamental reality to consciousness. It's not just some byproduct or epiphenomenon of brain functioning. It's fundamentally real in itself, and if anything, the brain is a byproduct of the functioning of that. So, also new today, as we were saying, is a new model of human development, higher states of consciousness, and this experience of transcending that we've been locating in different traditions and different people throughout history has, in these last decades, been identified to be a fourth state of consciousness, physiologically distinct from waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And here are the key characteristics of it. Attention is settled inward, the mind transcends perceptions and thoughts, consciousness becomes awake to itself alone. When the waves of the mind settle down and consciousness is no longer conscious of thoughts or feelings or perceptions, what is it conscious of? It can only be conscious of one thing that's at that level, and that's itself. And because of the intimate connection between mind and body, when the mind settles down, the body settles down, becomes deeply restful, and quite a striking byproduct, a thing that happens in this fourth state is that brain functioning becomes highly integrated and coherent. And we're leading up to here the question of how does this become a stable state? So that we're aiming at that. But just to pursue this for just a moment, the fourth state, one of the things that's new today is the scientific research on the effects of regular transcending. So here you see an image of a head, and the points on the scalp there represent the points on the scalp of a person from which the electrical activity is measured during an EEG reading. A cloth cap is put over a subject's head, That cloth cap has 28, 29 points on it with electrical leads coming out that are listening in on what's happening in your cerebral cortex at the time, the electrical activity at the outer layer of your brain. And so wherever you see two lines connected, as you see in the left-hand figure there, that means that the level of communication or integration between those 2 points has risen to the level of 80%, with 100% being perfect communication, perfect integration. So 80% is quite a high level of integration. And you can see the areas of the brain that have reached that level when subjects close their eyes and just rest. Now, when you begin TM practice, the change is pretty striking. Many more points on the scalp are connected, are integrated at the 80% level, and even higher. The bolder lines, the darker, heavier lines indicate that the level of integration has reached a 90% threshold. So we're getting close to perfect integration. So that's quite striking, and that change takes place within the first 60 seconds of beginning your TM practice, whether you know it or not. And obviously you're not intending for this change to happen. It's just a byproduct of practicing the effortless technique. And just for the sake of argument here, there are a number of other quite striking changes that happen in the brain when we meditate in this fourth state as a result of this transcending process. Blood flow to the brain increases. Why is that interesting? Well, blood flowing through the brain is what carries oxygen to the brain, carries nutrients to the brain, carries waste byproducts away from and out of the brain. So when blood flow is increasing to the brain, you have an image of the brain being bathed in greater nourishment, greater oxygen. The brain's transmission speed increases, very much like replacing a processor in a computer with a faster processor, with a solid-state processor. Literally, the transmission speed increases. Hidden brain reserves are awakened in this transcendental state, and the brain produces more of the biochemical serotonin, which is associated with well-being and deep rest and happiness, feeling good. So we're going to consider the idea of the experience of transcendence becoming a permanent state, not just something that comes and goes when we meditate, but something that becomes an all-time reality. People have described this in different traditions. It's a prediction that Maharshi makes of what happens as we dive within regularly on a regular basis. And when transcendence becomes permanent, then we have a fifth state as consciousness called cosmic consciousness. So here are some key characteristics of it. Unbounded awareness has become a permanent reality. Another way of describing it is that the fourth state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, comes to coexist with the three changing states of consciousness of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. So we have the fourth state going along as a backdrop to waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And that brings a state of what's classically called self-realization, often described as just perpetual freedom, liberation, life in harmony with natural law. And again, because of the connection between mind and body, that brings about this new state, brings about a new style of physiological functioning in which the body is deeply restful all the time, in which we have brain integration all the time, 24/7. And all of this brings about a phenomenon that Maharshi calls witnessing. Now, witnessing is very precisely defined here. This is not witnessing, we might say, oh, I witnessed a fender bender down at the 7-Eleven, or I witnessed a stick up at the bank. This witnessing refers to the experience of the self, uppercase S, meaning our unbounded, our silent, unbounded self at the source of thought, The experience of that self is the uninvolved observer of all experience. And to picture diagrammatically, here's our bubble diagram again. You'll notice a few differences. In the earlier bubble diagram, there was a line that went left to right underneath that topmost bubble, indicating that typically the mind is only awake at the surface and that the hidden depths remain unavailable to it. In cosmic consciousness, because we've transcended over and over again, the mind becomes increasingly familiar through that process with the experience of unbounded awareness, increasingly familiar with its own source, the source of thought, until it reaches the point where there's no more going in and out. It's in and out at the same time, all the time. So in this state, there's no line separating the surface of the mind from the depth. The mind is fully awake from its surface down to the depth, from the outer noisy, wavy level of the mind to its innermost recesses in pure silence. And when that happens, then our experience, instead of taking place from the wavy level of the mind up at the surface, takes place from the innermost level, from the field of silence. And this is what brings about the experience of witnessing. So that's a kind of abstract concept, and I want to make it real for you by reading an experience. We could read tons of these experiences that people through history have described with cosmic consciousness. Here's the arrows that are pointing at Long Beach, California, and Queens, New York, because I'm going to read you an experience from Billie Jean King, who was born in Long Beach. Queens, New York is the site of the U.S. Open. She played many of her tennis tournaments. And Billie Jean King, of course, one of the great athletes of modern times. I think she's won 34 major tennis tournaments. And to put that in context, Roger Federer, considered by many the greatest player ever, has won 18 major tournaments. Anyway, Billie Jean King, and she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom some years ago in the White House, the nation's highest civilian honor. So let me read you a few paragraphs from Billie Jean King's autobiography. She says, "On my very best days, I have this fantastic, utterly unself-conscious feeling of invincibility. I don't worry about how I'm hitting the ball, and I hardly notice my opponent at all. It's like I'm out there by myself. I concentrate only on the ball in relationship to the face of the racket, which is a full-time job anyway, since no two balls ever come over the net in the same way. I appreciate what my opponent is doing, but in a very detached, abstract way, like an observer in the next room. I see her moving to her left or right, but it's almost as though there weren't any real opponent, as though I didn't know and certainly didn't care whom I was playing against. When I'm in that kind of state, I feel that tennis is an art form that's capable of moving both the players and the audience. When I'm performing at my absolute best, I think that some of the euphoria that I feel must be transmitted to the audience." So here we have a classic description of the zone, as athletes call it, and what are the characteristics of the zone? One is peak performance, and we can check that box for Billie Jean King. She's playing at her absolute best. Another characteristic is bliss or happiness, and check that one for Billie Jean. She used the word euphoria. And the third characteristic of the zone experience is absolute effortlessness, to the point where you just feel that you're watching the whole thing. And certainly the Jean made that clear. So she goes into even more detail. I just want to share with you a few more paragraphs. And Lonnie, I'd like to ask if somebody there could keep track of the number of times that she uses the word perfect in this passage I'm about to read. So
Alexis has got a pen and a piece of paper, so she's going to do that for us here. Thank you.
You got a volunteer? Okay. Could somebody check Alexis's work?
I
Sure.
Volunteer for that?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Here's Billie Jean. The perfect shot is another matter. They don't come along very often, but when they do, they're great. It gives me a marvelous feeling of almost perfect joy, especially if I can pull one off on the last shot of the match. I can almost feel it coming. It usually happens on one of those days when everything is just right, when the crowd is large and enthusiastic, and my concentration is so perfect it almost seems as though I'm able to transport myself beyond the turmoil on the court to some place of total peace, calm. I know where the ball is on every shot, and it always looks just as big and well-defined as a basketball. Just a huge thing that I couldn't miss if I wanted to. I've got perfect control of the match. My rhythm and movements are excellent, and everything's just in total balance. That perfect moment happens in all sports. It's a perfect combination of a violent action taking place in an atmosphere of total tranquility. My heart pounds, my eyes get damp, and my ears feel like they're wiggling, but it's also just totally peaceful. And when it happens, I want to stop the match and grab the microphone and shout, "That's what it's all about." Because it is. It's not the big prize I'm going to win at the end of the match or anything else. It's just having done something that's totally pure and having experienced the perfect emotion. And I'm always sad that I can't communicate that feeling right at the moment it's happening. I can only hope that the people realize what's going on. So let's just circle back as our pattern here and look at some key lines from Billie Jean. She talks about a fantastic, utterly unself-conscious feeling of invincibility. So unself-conscious, no contriving, no manipulation. Invincibility, everything is aligned, everything is synced up. She's going to achieve her target. She says, I appreciate what my opponent is doing, but in a very detached, abstract way, like an observer in the next room. Recall that bubble diagram where the mind is fully awake and experience is taking place from the very innermost depth of the mind, from the field of silence, from the source of thought. That's the transcendental field. That field is outside of time and space. So naturally, she would describe the experience as he feels detached and abstract. He's absolutely detached. She's transcendental at that point. She's like an observer, just witnessing what's happening. She says, I'm able to transport myself beyond the turmoil on the court to some place of total peace and calm. Where's the place of total peace and calm? It's inside of her. It's that source of thought. It's the transcendental field, outside of the field of change, literally, outside the field of cause and effect. And she says it yet again in a different way. It's a perfect combination of a violent action taking place in the atmosphere of total tranquility. Where's the atmosphere of total tranquility? Deep inside. So here's our bubble diagram that's wavy at the surface. There's the turmoil on the court. There's the violent action. And that's coexisting with this atmosphere of total tranquility, this place of total peace and calm that's deep within. This is the full range of the mind. And when the full range of the mind is fully awake, then we can have activity on the surface. We can also have the experience of silence at the same time. Now, to come to Rod's question, this experience for Billie Jean was not a permanent condition. This was something that came and went, its experience of the zone. But the hypothesis is that this can become a permanent condition. This can become a permanent state when we regularly experience the transcendental field, when we regularly dive within and become without. And we have a description and understanding of the mechanics of how that happens, that every time we transcend, we dissolve stress in the physiology, we dissolve strain and fatigue. And that stress and that strain and that fatigue are like clouds obstructing the sun. They're obstructing the natural, normal experience of unbounded inner reality. So this is how Billie Jean describes it. How many times did she say the word perfect?
7.
7.
Is that correct?
Yeah,
I think you're right.
I think so.
So, there's no such thing as perfection in life. I think Billie Jean King would beg to differ when she uses the word perfect 7 times in a short passage. She's trying to make a point that if, even for short periods, one can live perfection, she's trying in words to give us an idea of what that perfection looks like, what it feels like. And she admits that words aren't going to do justice to it, but she's trying to characterize that to us. And I hope it's obvious that this kind of experience of the full wakefulness of the mind being awake from its surface to its depth, isn't limited to Wimbledon and US Open tennis players. It's not limited to the experience of championship sports. It can occur at any time, and the prediction is that as our nervous system becomes increasingly purified, increasingly free of stress and strain, then this experience will become more common. And that the inner light, like a rheostat growing brighter, just becomes inner light of life, inner light of consciousness, gradually just becomes brighter, so naturally and gradually that we're scarcely aware that it's happening. Oh, I forgot one line from Billie Jean King here. My heart pounds, my eyes get damp, and my ears feel like they're wiggling, but it's also just totally peaceful. So she has the last 3 phrases here are describing that state of being, the mind being active and silent at the same time. Total peace along with violent action. So questions or comments on that description of yet a higher state, cosmic consciousness?
So, Craig, you're describing cosmic consciousness and at the same time describing being in the zone or psychological flow. Could you talk a bit more about the relationship between psychological flow or the zone and cosmic consciousness? Because they're very different pathways to what seems to be a very common place.
Yeah, first of all, you said psychological flow, and I don't claim to be an expert, but my understanding of the flow experience is that it's not the same as the zone experience. In the flow experience, in my admittedly limited understanding, it's certainly a pleasant experience, and time flies when you're in having the experience of flow, but the experience of flow is that you're so lost in the experience, you're so lost and absorbed in what you're doing that you're not aware of anything else, even maybe the passage of time. So flow, as far as I understand it, is the experience of being absorbed in what you're doing outwardly. I haven't seen in the descriptions of the flow experience this dimension of inner silence coexisting with it, and that's what distinguishes, at least in my understanding, this notion of the zone and the glimpse of an experience of what we're calling consciousness. So, just a comment on your question, just to make a distinction between flow and zone. Of course, the zone experience is used, a great deal, and it's not something you'd say is really precisely defined. But to me, one key characteristic of the ultimate zone experience, if you want to call it that, is this experience of witnessing, of watching what you're doing, of the experiencing being so effortless that you are just as if observing yourself performing at your peak. So that's one initial response to your question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig.
And you're also saying here, Craig, that this is a glimpse into what might become a permanent status.
Right.
The possibility that there's a permanent state of this. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a glimpse, and as I said before, with regard to the experience of transcending, there are many people in different cultures and times who have experienced transcending as a glimpse, as a passing and fleeting phenomenon. Many of them wished that it could become permanent. Many of them wished that they could induce the experience somehow. But there are people in different cultures who describe transcendence becoming a permanent feature of one's experience. Meister Eckhart, the great Christian theologian who lived in the 1300s, has an essay called On Detachment. And he's describing this very experience of just the innermost level of mind, the innermost level is completely detached from what one is experiencing. And in that situation, your experience is that you're just an observer of what's going on around you. And you're not just an observer of what's going on around you, you're not just a silent witness to that, you're a silent witness to the activity within your own mind. So prior to cosmic consciousness, we tend to identify our thoughts as ourself. We tend to identify our ego with ourself. That's me. I am my ego. I am what I think. I am what I'm feeling. In cosmic consciousness, with the mind established in silence, in the transcendental field, it's established in the field that's beyond even thought, beyond even the ego, and you just become a silent, innocent, non-participating observer to your own, the contents of your own mind. You've transcended your ego. You're beyond that now. You've left, I've been reading, again, Christian writers, they'll talk about this, the experience of dying to one's, small self, one's limited self, awakening to one's cosmic self, one's unbounded self. So yes, there's definitely the notion that can become a permanent reality, and there are plenty of people here in Fairfield who say that that's their experience, that it has to become a permanent reality. And they're the people that Dr. Fred Travis has summoned to his lab to see what their brainwave activity looks like in that state. Other questions or comments?
I appreciate the clear, vivid examples, Craig. Thank you for that.
Let's take a look at then, I just referenced, is there another comment there?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I just mentioned change in brain functioning. This is research done by Fred Travis here in Fairfield. And we saw two of the images earlier. Here's a more complete picture of what happens. And this is an important point. Let's just walk through it. There in the upper left, there's a figure that we saw earlier. We see the level of integration in brain functioning when a person who hasn't learned to meditate just closes his or her eyes. In this research, the subjects are asked after closing their eyes to open their eyes and engage in a challenging computer task. So that challenging computer task activates the mind. And what typically happens is that whatever integration of brain functioning there might have been is diminished. And you can see that in the illustration there. There are only 2 points in the brain that are integrated at an 80% threshold or above. We drop down to the next row. There on the left is a figure that we also saw earlier. After 2 months of TM, we see the level of integration during TM practice. So these subjects are asked to open their eyes, do the challenging computer task, and you can see that, not surprisingly, the level of brain integration is diminished, but compare that figure in the middle on the right with the one in the upper left. There's much more integration there in the 2-month meditator, even during the challenging computer task, than there is in the person who's just sitting with eyes closed and resting. So you're seeing a picture of brain integration beginning to carry over into daily activity. Flash forward 7 years, we look at the degree of brain integration during TM. It's not really that much different than the figure just above it, than people who've been meditating just 2 months. Not that much different. And so one takeaway here is that if we ask the question, what's the difference between people who've just learned to meditate and long-term meditators? One answer is, well, the difference is not in what happens in their brains while they're meditating. In other words, there's not a practice effect with transcendental meditation, that you're an expert right from the beginning. You put two people side by side, a long-term, short-term meditator, measure their EEG, you won't be able to tell the difference. Where the difference does emerge, though, is outside of meditation. So there we go to the figure in the lower right during the challenging computer task and compare that figure to the one just above it. And you can see that for the 7-year meditator, there's a higher level of brain integration during the challenging computer task than there is for the 2-month meditator just above it. So here we see a picture of brain integration increasing over time, becoming more and more a feature of everyday activity, even during dynamic mental activity like a challenging computer task. Probably I would guess if it were physically possible to hook Billie Jean King up to an EEG machine while she was charging around a tennis court during a zone experience, we'd see a higher level of integrated brain functioning than we would during a non-zone experience. So to come back to the question Rob asked some time ago, we might ask, okay, what's the practical value? Here we go. The practical value of integrated brain functioning, well, I'll come to that in just a minute, but integrated brain functioning really underlies everything that happens in our life. The brain is the central switchboard of everything that we do. So the results of regular transcending through our TM practice, regularly diving within, we see accumulating benefits in the area of health, such as these in this list here. And if we switch to the level of mental potential, we see benefits like these. And significant about these benefits is that you might ask, well, when we're talking about integrated brain functioning, it's an elegant style of brain functioning, yes, we'd all acknowledge that, but what's its practical value? It turns out that there's a high level of correlation between integrated brain functioning on the one hand and IQ, intelligence, on the other. The more integrated your brain functioning, the more intelligent you are. And similarly with creativity, the greater the integrated brain functioning, the more creativity. Similarly with field independence, which means the ability to see the big picture while you're focusing sharply. Similarly with moral development, moral maturity, which means the ability to spontaneously take into consideration how what you think and do is going to affect people around you. So as brain integration rises, so does intelligence, creativity, field independence, moral maturity, and more. So is there a practical value to regular transcending? Yeah. Not only better health, but integrated brain functioning. Is there a practical value to integrated brain functioning? Yeah, the very best kind. We get smarter. We become more creative. We become more field independent. And as I look around at the wicked problems that we're facing, around us in the environment, you could define a problem as something that has not had sufficient creativity and intelligence brought to bear on it yet. That's why it's a problem. So if we have a way of increasing our intelligence and creativity, then we can begin to solve the problems that confront us in a more systematic way.
I got a couple of questions for you.
Others going. These are, here we have an empirical picture of a mind becomes more awake at its depth. And just a few other, along with when the mind wakes up, our personality grows. We become more unbounded inwardly. We become more ourselves. Lonnie Gamble is more Lonnie Gamble today than he was 10 years ago. More distinctively Lonnie, just because of the inner growth that he's been experiencing. If it's even possible to imagine Lonnie being more Lonnie, I don't know. That's cool. And then, here's the notion of the spillover effect of a coherent brain functioning spilling over into greater coherence in the world around us, is evidenced in these kinds of statistics.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Is this a good time to ask, or would you like to finish your thought?
Yeah. We're it's about at the end here on my side.
Okay. So, we all know people who've been meditating for a long time that aren't very nice people. Okay. That many people are. Okay. And we know people but we don't know what they were like before they started meditating, right? So there's some relative effect. And the way you present this, you make it sound like everybody has kind of this uniform development all the way around. But some people develop in some areas more than others. And this it isn't always. I think there's an arc, a trajectory, but it's difficult to say that. Some people will take what you said and say, well, just because the fact I meditate, I'm better than everybody else. Because, obviously my brain functioning is better, the science has proven it. And, so I'm just kind of throwing this back at you, Craig, to talk about, there are some people who, for example, they get a lot of benefit out of meditation, but then there's maybe some self-reflection they can do to improve some aspect of their personality that isn't fully developed, or there's, I'm just, these things will come out, and it can help to have a more balanced development through some of these other, we all know people who have meditated for a long time and they kill themselves, right? So I'm just, so go ahead.
Yeah. So Lonnie, I'm hearing three things in what you said. The first point that I hear you say is that we look at these research findings, and then we wonder, okay, how can somebody, this particular individual that I know, how can that person who's been meditating for 15 years, they're not very nice. The thing to remember about research studies is that they're done on large groups of people, and the finding of the study, what's reported, is the average for the whole group. It doesn't mean that every person in the group has grown in self-actualization, let's say. It doesn't mean that everybody in the group, has experienced a reduction in blood pressure. And that's the value of scientific research, is it can take a large group of people and show you what an overall trend is going to be. Right. Does it mean that if, person A learns transcendental meditation, that their blood pressure is going to go down? There's no guarantee of that. But what the scientific research does mean is that in a large group of people, if they all learn to meditate, and if they all have hypertension issues, as a group, their average blood pressure is likely to go down. So certainly there would be exceptions. And if you meet somebody who's not very nice, who's been meditating for a while, as you said, who knows what that person would have been like, today if they hadn't been meditating.
Right.
So anyway,
I think that's a valid point. I think people often make that error.
The scientific research is with respect to groups.
I think people often make that error, though, and say that's going to apply, all of those things are going to apply to every individual. And so I hear that, I hear that sentiment, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think that's true. So anyway, I don't want to belabor this, but go ahead.
No, it's important. Even brain researcher Fred Travis will say that people's brains function differently. People have different physiological characteristics, including in their brain functioning. Will their brains be functioning in a measurably more coherent way in a few years after they meditate? There's no promise of that. It could be that that finding doesn't show up for that particular person. Then again, that kind of measurement is a fairly crude measurement. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been a change in that person's brain functioning. It just means that it isn't showing up. Yeah. Anyway, that's a response to the first thing I heard you say. Second thing I heard you say is, some claim that because I meditate, I'm better than everybody else. That's absurd on its face. You might be better than who you were 10 years ago, you might be less stressed. Probably you will be. You may be less anxious. You may be healthier. But are you better than everybody else? Of course not. There could be people who, by luck of the draw, were born with with nervous systems that were much freer of stress than you. Much less fatigue than you, more highly developed than you are. So we just each have our own self to work on, and we're the yardstick to ourselves. There's no point comparing ourselves to others, and certainly there's no basis for claiming that we're better than anybody else. And the third thing that I heard you say, let's see if I can remember it, was, can there be any benefit by doing some other kind of work on myself in addition to meditating? And of course. There are issues, that we might have that there could be mental health issues that could be resolved through some work in psychotherapy or some self-reflection like that. Transcending is not a substitute for taking good care of yourself on the surface. We need to exercise. We need to exercise and keep our brains stimulated. We need to eat well. We need to continue developing through the kinds of things that we do on the outside that keep us progressing.
Thank you, Craig. That was I really appreciate the clarity on that. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm just happy to stop talking and hear what everybody else has to say.
Anybody have any other?
Craig, the context of the Supreme Awakening and Perennial Philosophy is very much that people from throughout the world, independent of cultures, have achieved these same sort of states of consciousness. And as we wrap up the presentation, we've really been focusing on TM as a methodology as a modern day sort of methodology. Are there other methods, or perhaps you could comment on other pathways that are modern to achieve that same sort of transcendental consciousness?
Sure, that's a great question. I think the big answer to that is that whatever pathway one takes is eventually going to lead one to the highest state of consciousness. That everybody, whether they're aware of it or not, whether they believe it or not, is headed towards the highest level of human development, which, in the framework that we're using, is unity consciousness. That's the direction of life. That would be the contention of the perennial philosophy, that's the purpose of life, and life isn't fulfilled until that higher stage is reached, whatever pathway it takes and however long it takes. And certainly throughout history there have been multiple methods. We may not know what they were. In some traditions, did Lao Tzu have a meditation technique? Probably. Did he teach one? Probably. Do we know the details of it? I'm not aware of it, but something was carried down through history, and there are modern day versions in the East, in the Taoist tradition and the Shinto tradition of meditation and prayer. So yeah, there are all sorts of different techniques that people can do. Even in the Christian tradition, which as I mentioned, I've been reading into, people have tried all sorts of things to try to put themselves into a transcendental state. Strange things, long fasts and sleeping on the ground and trying to keep yourself awake at night, and wearing uncomfortable clothing and sleeping on beds of nail. Just strange things when you think about them. To try to just knock yourself, out of the normal waking reality into some kind of higher state. So there are all sorts of things that people have tried in the spirit of seeking the more that they know, the higher reality that they know is there. In the modern world, there are all sorts of meditation techniques. Mindfulness is an umbrella term that includes many different kinds of techniques. as far as I know, the technique that's explicitly designed for effortlessly eliciting the experience of transcending is transcendental meditation. I haven't come across another one that's explicitly designed to do that. But I think it's a great thing that meditation has become mainstream and that people are doing it more and more. It just means that collective consciousness is waking up, and that more and more people today are realizing that there is more to life to be lived than what I've been living. Some people waking up to the fact that to solve the problems that we're grappling with around us, we have to do something like diving within. So I think that's all to the good. Just one more comment on the TM technique. There's a lot of research on different forms of mindfulness meditation. It hasn't shown the kind of brainwave integration. It shows changes of brain functioning, to be sure, but it hasn't shown the kind of integrated brain functioning that results from the transcending experience that we get through a TM practice, with that integration, that integrated brain functioning highly correlated with the growth of intelligence and creativity and field independence and so on. So as far as I know, that's unique. That's a response to that question.
You got on to your conclusion here. I just have one other comment on my question earlier, and that is, I think also what happens as you meditate, things may come up that you may be drawn to some things that you need, a medical condition that is holding you back or something like that, or a psychological condition or whatever. And so I think the process of meditating, of transcending, speeds you up on that path and brings those issues up for you to then maybe explore, on the surface level of life. It helps to surface those things that may have been hidden before, if that makes sense.
Good comment. So just in conclusion, kind of coming back to our perennial philosophy, the experience that we've seen, we had just a few examples today of some of the great people in history describing their experiences of transcending. Those don't have to be left to chance. They don't have to be rare. They don't have to be fleeting. There's a systematic way that they can be elicited. And I put this in terms of every child. A couple weeks ago, I created this particular slide for a group of educators that I spoke to in Chicago a few weeks ago. So this is in terms of children. But the point is that from childhood onward, the experience of transcending that great figures through history have lauded, have celebrated, they don't have to be left to chance. Every child can have it, and they can have the benefits that come with it. And they can have their birthright, which is enlightenment. And that's the culmination of the perennial philosophy, the primordial tradition, that all human beings have the ability of transformation, of enlightenment, of salvation, of whatever you want to call it. It goes by different names, but it refers to the same thing, which is just a fully awake mind established in the transcendental reality, which is our own innermost consciousness. So that's it from my side. It's wonderful to be connected with you in Hawaii. Cold and chilly and cloudy and windy here today, so I wish I were there with you in person.
It is here too, relatively. It's the relative. So, we're
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a relatively cloudy, cold, and dismal day in Hawaii, but it's still a pretty nice day.
How cold is cold, Bonnie?
Oh, 70, 72, 70, I don't know, 69, I don't know, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And let's give Craig a big hand.
Yeah, thank you.
And have we got any other, you've given us a lot to think about here, Craig, and I think tied a lot of things together that we've been talking about, a lot of questions we've been exploring, you have brought up and discussed in a very complete way, and we really appreciate that. Anybody have any other questions or comments or anything?
No, just thank you for your time. Yeah.
Great. I hope it was helpful.
We see ourselves. We're
We're
we're getting a
Thank you
self.
for Lonnie's base there in Hawaii.
And we hope to get you out here sometime, Craig, to maybe do a week version of this with our group out here, maybe with some people from the community as well, as we continue to develop our presence here. So, thank you. And I want to just single Craig out. He's been a huge supporter of this Hawaii program right from the start, and of me personally in my career. And I have a very unconventional kind of academic career. And Craig has been a huge supporter and encourager of me and my eccentricity here. And I just want to really appreciate you, Craig, and your family, and Soren, and your wife, and everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. I'm a big fan of Lonnie Campbell. I would want to saying that. All right. Thank you all. Have a
Okay,
great rest of your
aloha.
day.
Aloha, Craig. Aloha, Kefua.
Let's see. Okay, now let me see if I can get that.
Soren.
You know Soren? That's his
Yeah.
son. Yeah. Yeah.
He's working with Apple now. He just got certified as like an Apple technician.
Well, he's been doing my technical support forever. But
But now he's working for Apple.
like out of Fairfield?
I don't know how to work, but like, if people
Yeah.
need their computer or phone,
Yeah.
like technical help, or
Oh,
needs to be fixed or replaced,
he's one of the
something,
Pearson people
he's
that
like
come.
certified to do that.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, he's been doing my technical support forever. Stop recording.